Learning game development hasn't been easy, especially when it comes to problem that you cannot find solution to and you finally have to use your own brain instead of taking everything from internet. But the real problem comes when you don't have an idea. That means you cannot create a game if you don't have an idea for the game. And one way to tackle that is through joining a game jam because they provide you a theme for the game and you kind of start to think within the circle instead of going all over the place. So I decided to join the game jam. But then there's another problem. If it's your first game jam, you might end up not completing it at all. There's a solution to this problem also, which is joining a team. Because when some other people are dependent on you, you can't just leave the project in the middle. You have to complete it, even if it's just an empty project like this guy over here. But I'm sure he wasn't on the team. So I started to search for a team and found a team which looked pretty legit at first. One guy would be handling art designing or any kind of 3D modeling we need, and other would be a programmer, and there was even one person for music and sound effect, which you don't realize you need when you are so used to using royalty free music and sound effects. But anyway, I was so excited and thought it'd be fun. I didn't tell you what I was going to do in this team, and there's a reason for that because things I just mentioned, I had to do them all alone, except music and sound effects, because for some reason other two guys couldn't join us, but I still had a team, even though I had to make it alone, but the idea came from her. And I give full credit to her for that, because as I said earlier, without idea you cannot make the game. So the Jam's theme was less is more, and our idea, more like her idea, which I agreed to, was that we make action game where we shoot and enemy's legs takes more damage than the whole body. Usually it's the other way around, less is more fitted perfectly here because you think legs will take less damage and body will take more, and here you get the point. And then we had to decide if it would be 2D or 3D game, which ended up being 3D, and then I saw let's make the first person shooter. It will also be challenging because the game jam has a time limit and you have to complete whatever you can in that time period. For this one, it was 1 week, which was a lot of time for this simple game. So I started working on the project. First, I imported ProBuild to build a dummy map so we have something to walk on. It's a great tool, by the way, you can do a lot with it. Then I moved to character, and you normally do need a character for most of the games, but in first person shooter you can get away with just using hands and gun or just a gun mounted on camera, and that's what I exactly did. And for the guns I used free gun model from devassist.com. Then with a little bit of coding and adding character controller to our player, we have a working player. I could use Unity standard as an FPS controller, but here I wanted to code everything from scratch, so I get what it takes to do that. And I know it may look weird to you that only a gun is walking, but here my purpose is not to make the best realistic game, but to complete a game that is playable. And of course after the game I can add details like hands and stuff, but for now I think it is fine. And now it is time to build the action part, which is shooting. There are two methods for that: instantiating bullets and raycasting. And for people who don't know, instantiate is a method where any object is instantiated at a certain point, and in this case that object would be bullet, and it leaves the gun point at a certain velocity, and most importantly you can see the bullet, and when it collides with something you can run your code. But in raycasting, a ray is sent towards a direction and it checks if it hits something, and if it did, you can add other stuff like player's health reduction or death. There are of course technical differences, but I don't want to get into details here. So with the first method I was having some problem and not having time to fix them since I already started late, so I decided to go with the raycast method. And then with a little bit of coding and testing we have a working gun. I also added the sounds which were provided by my teammate, and then used the Unity's particle package to have this effect of bullet like spark, and whenever it hits something it leaves a mark which disappears of course after a fraction of a second. And then I added the reload system and UI for that, so we won't have infinite amount of bullets when we are shooting. Regardless of this totally beautiful world, the game was still looking pretty empty, and now was the time to create some enemies, and for that I added the capsule, which probably I'm gonna change later, and again with some coding made the enemy's health system so that it takes damage and gets destroyed when the health reaches 0. And I also added the blood effect, so whenever it hits the enemy it doesn't react like it is hitting some kind of metal or anything else. Before I'd make the enemy shoot our player and have a gun and follow our player wherever it goes, I needed a map, and for that I went to ssstore.com, ssstore, and here I chose this free beautiful asset. I think it looks pretty good, and I imported it into our scene. Here we have our map, and I think it looks pretty good. And now I had to change our enemy into some real human instead of just capsule. And so for that I went to maximo.com and chose this model. I know it looks a bit funny, but I think it will work fine. So I downloaded the character, I imported it into our scene. Enemy was looking okay at this point, but now I have to make him follow the player around the map and also shoot the player whenever it reaches a certain distance. So with a little bit of coding I was able to make this. So I converted our enemy into a prefab and added a gun. I also downloaded few animations from Maximo. Combat animation you can find a lot. I added few animations. So now I need to bake the map so enemies knows, and basically enemies knows what is ground and what surfaces he can walk on. And for that I used nav mesh, and I added the nav mesh agent to enemy so that it follows the player. And now let's see how does it react. Okay, for some reason the animation is not working, so this needs to be fixed right now. And here I was checking if the enemies follows the player correctly wherever he goes, and whenever enemies is too close to player it starts shooting, so it changes its states and we can shoot back, and whenever the enemy's health is 0 it dies and a blood effect is played. And I'm happy with the results so far. I think it is working and looking fine. And here is the final gameplay. I also added the wave system. There are 3 waves that you have to survive against. With every wave enemies give you a little bit more damage, and I also added the second gun. To match the theme, pistol does the more damage than the rifle, and of course if you hit legs the enemies will take more damage than the whole body. So to sum it up, it was fun to make game in less than a week, but there are things that I would have changed. Since it was my first jam, I didn't plan for the game properly, so I had a lot of things in mind that need to be implemented. So it was hard to focus on one thing at a time. It is always better to plan and execute every step by focusing only on that step without thinking about rest of the game. And about the coding, in the end it kind of got really messy. There were a lot of scripts even for little things since I wasn't thinking about organizing them. But after the jam I have a lot of time to fix a lot of stuff. I may return this game into multiplayer. I think that would be fun, and I'll definitely change the map with something I create with my own creativity, and that is if I have any. If you want to play the game, link is in the description, and I hope you like the video and see you guys in the next one.